welcome. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Daniela Raposo. I'm the director of the Columbia Startup Lab. We are so excited to have you here for our next CSL Talks, which is essentially a series we started that's like the TED Talks for the entrepreneurship ecosystem at Columbia. We have so many amazing entrepreneurs currently at the lab and in years past that are thought leaders across industries. We thought, why not give them a platform to talk to you guys about what they're expert in and tell you a little bit about their entrepreneurial journey. We're so excited to have here today Donna Sanders, who is a Columbia Startup Lab alumni, a Columbia Business School grad, and the founder of Virimodo. She's going to talk to you guys about our life and our planet and offer up behaviors that we can change to reduce our carbon footprint in a meaningful way. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you, Donna. Thank you so much for being here today.
Sure. My name again is Donna Sanders, and I was in the lab a couple of years ago I was there one time and then I went away and then I came back. And so I've had like 2 stints. Daniela was there the full time and just met AJ. So happy to be talking with you guys. I graduated Columbia Business School 2017, did the Global Asia program, which means that I did Columbia, London Business School, and Hong Kong University. So we're going to talk today, give you a format of how this is going to go. I'm going to talk a lot about carbon in general, and then 5 steps you can do in your life to decrease your carbon footprint. And then I'll talk a little bit about our company at the end. Welcome to this conversation. And so about me, my background is that I am a certified energy auditor, and I'm certified to do that with the Association of Energy Engineers. And I have been doing that for about 10 years. This is my 3rd startup. The first one, right out of college, I went into the United States Marine Corps as a nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare officer. So then I went and worked with the companies Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. They're pretty famous, especially right now. And did that for like 3 years and took my corporate dollars and decided I was going to do something that mattered. Opened a home for children and reunified foster kids with families. That was my first startup. The second startup was the energy efficiency startup, where, again, I worked with kind of the same population, low and moderate income families, helping them become more comfortable in their homes and use less energy while they're doing it. And then Virimodo, this is my 3rd startup. I'm also affiliated with the Environmental Defense Fund, which is EDF, and I'm an EDF Climate Fellow. So some of you guys may be on the call that are thinking about becoming an EDF Fellow. I'm happy to talk with anybody about that. So that's a little bit about me. We've won some awards. It's the National Science Foundation, the Clean Tech Open, and the Black and Latino Tech Initiative. And so now let's talk a little bit about carbon footprint. So generally, a definition is a carbon footprint means the total greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by an individual. And we'll talk a lot about how that happens and what it means to become carbon neutral. And so everyone is constantly emitting greenhouse gases or CO2 emissions, and all of our daily activity and all of our consumption, it's releasing as we go. And it's releasing, of course, in the atmosphere. And one thing that people may not know is that air pollution does actually kill 7 million people every year worldwide. And it's broken up to about half of that is poor indoor air quality. And you can think about this mostly is in developing nations. I know a lot of people on this call are from different parts of the planet, and everybody has probably traveled many different places. But you can think of a lot of these families that are still cooking indoor with, coal, and that's a great part of the indoor. But the outdoor, this is a lot more in the developing world and the developed world, where you have a lot of traffic. And in addition to traffic, the whole business of generating electricity in these coal-fired plants. And so this affects everybody, everywhere, from places like Los Angeles, LA, to Beijing, to, pretty much every place on the planet. And that's a lot of people to be dying every year because of poor air quality. And the good thing about it is that we can offset emissions. And a lot of you may have heard of carbon offsets, But carbon offsets, they fund renewable energy and reforestation projects so that we can reduce the carbon emissions and the greenhouse gases that we're putting out into the atmosphere. And how this works, how does a carbon offset work? So what happens? Companies partner with groups that are bringing online new solar farms or new wind farms, or they're doing a lot of tree planting, and they say, hey, what are you doing and can we contribute to that? And they say, yeah, this is where the project is, and yes, please contribute to it. So then they go to people like you and I, and they say, okay, guys, we have this going on and that going on, and if you need to offset X amount, you should purchase that amount. And then they give that money to that group, and they put that money toward new projects. And this is really important because obviously the less we can use fossil fuels to do any and everything in our lives, the better. So all of us can make a difference with regards to that. I want to just kind of give a term for everyone, and that is additionality. And this is so we'll be kind of struck here with a lot of like climate terms. Additionality means that this is adding a new additional solar farm, or it's adding a new additional wind farm, or we're planting new additional trees for reforestation. And so that's really important because that means that you are in fact reducing greenhouse gases. So if you as a person decide you're going to do carbon offsets, please ask the group that you're working with if their projects provide additionality. And that is really key. So you can make the most impact as possible. And so we can actually also, these contributions, as I've said before, they do help with this, and it will help us to make cleaner air, as well as all live a healthier life and make for a safer environment. So let's talk a little bit about, what does all this mean, greenhouse gases and this type of thing. And so the greenhouse gas effect, basically when sun reaches the earth, some of it is reflected back into space, but some of that heat is absorbed and hit back onto the earth's surface. And that's because the greenhouse gases are trapping that heat. So again, some of this is natural, of course, but a lot of it is not being released. And that's because the greenhouse gases are blocking it, and it's warming the earth. And you can think about this really quite simply, is you see melting ice caps a lot on pictures, and it is because of this process. This heat is getting trapped, and the ice caps are melting. The result of that, of course, is the oceans are rising. And in places like Miami and a lot of places all across the globe, in Indonesia, this water level increasing becomes a very large problem. But there's so many problems as a result of this greenhouse gas effect. And all of it has to do, a great deal of it has to do with greenhouse gases. And so this is a cool visualization that it starts in 1950. And over the course of this time period, from the 50s to like 2013, you can see the earth is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And at the top of the planet, where those ice caps are, this is just letting you visually see what is happening. It's really interesting. I'm so interested in this until I actually took a trip to Alaska and stayed outside all summer. This might sound foreign to a bunch of people, but I did do that. I spent the whole summer outside. So half of the summer I spent sea kayaking in Glacier Bay National Park, and I kayaked about 250 miles over this period of 20 days. And you basically go out and you take nothing. You take whatever you can pack in the front of your kayak and whatever you can pack in the back of your kayak, and you go and you paddle. So I've seen every single one of these glaciers with my own eyes. And I've seen the melting, and I just knew at that point, about 6 years ago, that the next startup would be something that attempted to solve that. So these greenhouse gas emissions, mostly, this, as you see this chart, you can see the economic sector of where they come from. So a great deal, 28% is coming from transportation. You can think about cars and gridlock on the LA highway. And then a lot of it is coming from electricity, some of it from industry, commercial, and residential, and then agricultural. And the interesting part about it, when we look at this even further, if we dig in a little bit more, is that, you know, this whole business of fossil fuels, if you take a look at the residential section, you can see that we're using most of it with natural gas. And that's going to be important to think about later on, because we're going to talk about natural gas as compared to some of these other things. And then with regards to the electricity generation, still in the US, a great deal of electricity is still being generated with coal, which is just really outrageous. That's my personal opinion. I think it's truly outrageous. And then still a lot of it with natural gas. So these are the two things that affect us. So this is where we're going to dig in a little bit deeper, even more. And so for you and me and anybody else who wants to understand, you know, what is my carbon footprint as it applies to my energy use, you're going to have to do two things. You need to understand, you know, how much electricity are you using? And that's usually in kilowatt hours. So what we're looking here is a sample electrical bill. On your bill, you will see something, the kWh for the kilowatt hours. So you're going to want to look there and find that and get that number. And then the gas. So you'll have a gas bill and you're looking for your units used, which is in therms. So you will grab that number. Those two things matter. And we're going to end up now taking those numbers and converting them to how much and how many greenhouse gases are a result of our gas use as well as our electricity use. And so there's a really cool calculator that everybody can use. And I guess I'll put it in the chat when I get a chance. But the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, has a carbon or greenhouse gas calculator. You can go there and you can input your electricity and you can input your gas. So in this case, you can see here, we went there, we put in, it was 244 kilowatt hours. And you can see that it says kilowatt hours of electricity. And then it will tell you how many pounds of greenhouse gas emissions that is equal to. So this is a super duper easy calculator to use, just so you can understand what your specific carbon footprint is. And you will do the same thing with your gas. So you will punch in your therms of gas, and this is a typo. It says 380, that's wrong, because this gas is actually 1,500 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions. And so at that point, we know that our electricity is worth 380 pounds and that the gas is over 1,500. And so then this kind of like makes no sense. And so what the EPA does further is they say, this is what that is equivalent to. That's equivalent to you planting 13 trees and them growing for 10 years. And that's equivalent to you not driving almost, 2,000 miles in your car. And that's equivalent to taking 873 pounds of coal out of this whole equation. So there are a bunch of equivalencies there so you can understand the impact you're making. So this whole business of people thinking, just like individuals like you and I, thinking that like individual consumption or individual choices don't matter, they absolutely matter. Absolutely, everyone's efforts absolutely matter. And so that kind of brings me, like, when I was looking at this, I was like, my God, there's a big difference between electricity and gas with regards to the amount of carbon that's in the air, or that gets the greenhouse gases that get emitted. And so it's something to think about. And as we think about it, we can look at New York City as an example. And New York City is a great city, and it gets a lot of its electricity and power from a lot of different sources. So some of it's coming from wind, I'm reading left to right, and then some of it's coming from nuclear, and gas and hydro, and on down the line. And you can think about this term grid. Grid is basically the wires that get the electricity to us, but you can see this grid has a lot of different energy sources on it. And it's the same in the US, no matter where you are. There's these different segments of power that's being piped in, and then it all gets combined. And that's what is making up the power as you flip on your lights in the city. This is where it's coming from. It's coming from all types of different sources. And so in our case, we really want to have as much renewable as possible. You look at New York and you see, and I was kind of surprised when I saw how much hydro New York has. But it's interesting because of Niagara Falls, right? Upstate New York. So this is where that's coming from. It's a lot of electricity, a lot of energy. And in the city and the next coming years, like within the next 10 years, this wind number is going to jump up tremendously because New York is going to be adding a lot of wind energy off the coast in the ocean, so that instead of getting our power way from upstate New York, we'll be able to get it directly, basically on the other side of Long Island, and have the energy source much closer to the city, which has a lot of good ramifications, not only the fact that it's renewable energy. And so the reason that the gas had this huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and electricity, that number was a little bit smaller, is because of all that stuff that I showed you that's going into the New York grid. So this electricity number, you can see that it's filtered by a lot of renewable energy sources. And gas, as it turns out, we're looking at the carbon intensity of these fuel sources. In other words, how much carbon is being consumed every time this fuel source is being burned. And you can think about this as like the dirty stacks that you see in the air, pumping out this dirty pollution. It turns out that gas is just really not a really clean thing. And then you move all the way over to your right, and you can see that, solar and hydro and wind, they have none of these emissions that these other fuel sources do. And so that's why when we were looking at that picture, it was like 1,500 compared to 300. That's the reason why. It's because the fuel source has so much carbon built up in it. And when it burns, it just gets to be extremely dirty. So that's a second term for you guys already. So the first one was additionality. The next one is carbon intensity. So it matters the type of fuel that you're burning and the type of fuel that's a part of the grid. And I have been in a lot of developing nations in the wintertime where they have these coal-fired plants. And if any of you guys have been in some of these places, you know that it is just, you cannot breathe. At least I couldn't. So that kind of brings me to the thought of like, what if we used 100% renewable energy? Like, what if with electrification, we could have all, electric powered cars, and that electricity could come from a solar farm or a wind farm or hydro off the coast of New York City. Outside, the ozone and the air we breathe would be tremendously better. And this whole term electrification, this is a term that's being thrown around a lot. And it just basically means, we're going to get rid of fuels and use renewable energy to supply our electricity. And I don't know if there are any questions here that you guys want to talk about, or if you have any thoughts. I'm happy to stop here and take any questions. I don't know if there are any. Daniela, are we good?
Donna, you had two come in. If you look at the Q&A section. So the first one was, what are the main assumptions in the GHG emissions calculation?
Yeah.
So if you want to address that one first, and then we can get to the other one.
Yeah. So the main assumptions, you guys do take a look at the EPA, go to the EPA greenhouse gas calculator. They list every single assumption that's there, as well as all the calculations. But primarily, the main thing that is in the greenhouse gas assumption is that, number one, let's try to go back. What is the fuel source, right? Because different fuel sources have different carbon intensity. Another assumption they're looking at is what is the makeup of your grid. So New York City's grid with this wind and hydro and nuclear at different percentages is going to be different than LA's grid, that's different than Miami grid. So they're looking at what's on your grid and what's being burned and how much of it are you using. That example we were looking at the beginning. Let's get our therms off our gas bill and let's get our kilowatt hours off our electricity bill. So it's a matter of consumption, the fuel type, and the carbon intensity of those fuels, and your grid carbon intensity.
Great, and I think that's a good segue to the next question. Are the carbon footprint in the production of the solar panels, hydro, and wind turbine materials taken into account in the numbers?
Yeah, they do not. They are looking at strictly the emissions themselves. So generally speaking, the answer to that is no.
Okay, great. Any other questions, guys, before we continue? Feel free to use Q&A or chat, or you can even just speak up if you're comfortable.
Yeah. So this whole business of electrification and carbon intensity, it's an interesting, very, very interesting conversation, and a lot of people are involved with this discussion. And so again, not having these problems would save a lot of lives. I'm not really sure which city this is, but I've been personally in a lot of cities where this is the look that you get, especially in the winter, and it's just not, it's not good for us. And so as you guys think about calculating your carbon footprint, we looked at the gas and we looked at electricity. A lot of times, let's go left to right. You may get an opportunity with some, whether you're shopping online, they'll say, hey, do you want to offset this? And so pretty much they're looking at how much gas it takes to get your package from point A to point B. And they're using those gallons of gas to do that calculation. You guys may have taken an airline flight and you get this little piece of paper that says, do you want to offset your flight? So they're doing the same thing. They're taking that jet fuel times the distance that you travel and coming up with that greenhouse gas number. Has there been anybody who's seen this? Does anybody, you will see this more and more when you fly. They'll say, do you want to offset this flight? And usually, I don't know, it's usually like $2 or $3. It's something extremely cheap. And we can talk about that in a Q&A afterwards. That is, and that's going to change though. That's because we don't have the right price on carbon. But anyway, you'll see it on your flights, and you're going to start to see it more and more where you're getting asked to say, hey, do you want to offset this? So really, why does any of this stuff matter? Legislatively, across the country, there are about 455 cities and county that do have mandates that deal with emissions reductions. And the number is growing because we have a new president. And this, I made this slide before he was elected, so we can take off elect. But President Biden is proposing that, we're going to be carbon free by the year 2035, and we'll have net zero emissions by the middle of the century. And so this whole business, it's really, really interesting because President Biden actually, in his first set of executive orders, like 3 days ago, he just signed an executive order, everybody on this call, that has to do with the social cost of carbon. So the president is saying, I want to know, what does this carbon cost us? And so he's setting up a whole slew of scientists and people to figure out what does it cost for a pound of carbon. Because if he can say what it costs for a pound of carbon, and you know how many pounds of carbon you as a person are using with your at least energy consumption, you have a sense of understanding how much you're costing society. So me, if I had 100 pounds of greenhouse gases, and the president and that group said, oh, that's worth whatever, $10 a pound, then basically I'm costing society $1,000. Why is that important? It's important because as you look at this slide, this whole global warming and the stuff that we started off with beginning, and it causes a lot of ramifications on the planet, most of which are environmental in the form of storms. So Hurricane Sandy cost the state of New York $65 billion. And these 2020 California wildfires alone are over 10 billion. So this has to come out of your tax money and my tax money. We have to rebuild these roads, rebuild these buildings, etc. So this is extremely expensive situation, and it needs to be addressed. So by the president putting an executive order to study the cost of carbon, all of us on this call can just really think about, what does that mean? That means that in the future, there will be ramifications for behaviors or activities or something that has to do with excess carbon usage because of, these storms and because of, our air quality, etc. So I found it really interesting. That was like one of the first things he did. So economically and socially, this is New York City with the current scenario, the year 2100. The city is going to be underwater. So lots of work needs to be done. And New York City, by the way, is extremely aggressive with regards to these types of things. So there is a local law called Local Law 97. And Local Law 97, it is a groundbreaking greenhouse gas law. And it sets carbon caps on buildings over 25,000 square feet. What does that mean? That means that if the building you live in is more than 25,000 square feet, that building is going to have a cap. If the building exceeds the cap, then the building owner is going to owe money as a result. And our team has done a lot of analysis of all the buildings in the city. And we have estimated that this will, in fact, be worth $4 billion to New York City alone. That's how many fines are going to have to be paid if people continue to do what they've always done. So again, this is a groundbreaking law. The city is very serious about this because of these photos that you're seeing, and because of other reasons. So feel free to look up Local Law 97. If you live in a building that's more than 25,000 square feet, I would recommend you asking the landlord, if you intend to stay there for the next 3 or 4 years, the landlord or whoever it is you speak to ask them, what are they doing now to get their greenhouse gases and their carbon footprint in order? Because let's face it, if the building ends up owing $100,000 and there's 100 people in the building, who do you think is going to pay the price for this fine? Seriously, guys. Your rent will increase. This is not a joke. It's truly true. So the owner's not going to eat $100,000 fine. They're going to pass it on. So, I mean, truly, I would recommend that, if you do live in one of these larger buildings, you take a look and ask them, what are they doing now? They will have to start paying fines effective 2024, which means that in the year 2023, any and all carbon that was calculated in 2023, that's the fine that they have to pay in 2024. So we've got less than 2 years that this affects everybody's pocketbook. And so, what can we do as people to do some stuff that makes sense, right? So number one is if we all could eat less meat, that would be fewer greenhouse gases. Livestock alone account for almost 15% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Everything from the belching to the the manure, to the feed that it takes, that you have to grow the food to feed them, to the pesticides, and all the gases that come from that. It's just a large impact on our planet with regards to growing animals so that we can eat them. The next thing you can think about, and everybody in New York City can do this, is you can switch to renewables. You can tell your utility, I want to use renewable energy. And as we go back and you guys think about the grid, you know that the grid is made up of a lot of different things. But what you're doing is pushing for more demand for this renewable energy. So if you tell your utility company, I want renewable energy, they'll say, checkbox, we understand, you can have renewable energy. So if everyone said, I'm just going to go back, Daniela. If everyone said, we want renewable energy, then all this stuff that's on this chart that's not a renewable energy source, we'd be pushing the city to get to where they want to be even faster. So that is certainly something that we all can do. The other thing that we can do, in addition to consuming less meat and using renewable energy, is we can actually turn down our thermostats. And doing that, you can actually have cost savings between 5 and 10%, as well as avoid 300 kilograms of the greenhouse gas emissions per household. So that's something else you can simply, easily do. This is not a complicated thing to do. Everyone can do that. Everybody can also buy carbon offsets. So once you guys already know how to calculate your carbon footprint. You know how many greenhouse gas emissions you're throwing up. If you want to go ahead and offset your carbon, then you can do that. Again, always ask for additionality, because you want to make sure they're putting this money toward new solar farms, new wind farms, or new reforestation projects. And you could work with our company. We kind of do all these things. We help people understand how to get to clean energy. We do utility bill error checking. It's really interesting, but a lot of bills have errors on them, and people don't know how to read their utility bill. And that's a problem. That could be money that is being missed. And so that's what we do. Tell you a little bit about our company now. We help people understand, and companies, how to become carbon neutral. And so from like a resident experience, we are looking to connect with the buildings that have some type of digital platform, so we can connect to their API. And then you simply would log on. If you want to use renewable energy, you could choose those preferences. Users have a dashboard. We do analytics, and we do the bill errors and get you a refund if you're owed that. And then we help with carbon offsets. And then from a property manager's point of view, we are aggregating all their data in one place. And you can think about it, even from your perspective, you've got like bills everywhere and papers everywhere. So it's the same for them. So we're getting it all in one spot, crunching those numbers and presenting those results, and then giving them ways to move about the situation faster. Really and truly, with Local Law 97 and pending things that President Biden will put forward with regards to carbon and how much it costs, this type of a solution is, it's much better to use some solution where you can have analytics than trying to figure it out by paper or using a spreadsheet. So this is just a little bit of a look at what it looks like for like a property manager. So they're understanding everything with regards to their greenhouse gas emissions. And we do this in real time, so they understand where they are. So there will like be no surprise when they get to the year 2023 and they're like, oh my God, I didn't know I was this much over. There's just like no reason to do that. And we enable you, as well as a building owner, to purchase carbon offsets directly online. And all of our offsets provide additionality, and they've all been certified and regulated to do so. And it's really quick. It's like 3 clicks. And then overall, what ends up happening for the typical building owner or property manager, they get to lower their operating costs. Generally speaking, if they publicize it, that they're doing these sustainability measures, they'll have higher occupancy rates and they can charge more for their rent. And then they're reducing their greenhouse gases, which is really what we're all about. So guys, as we wrap up this call, we're at this point now where we're onboarding buildings and companies. And so we're seeking referrals. So if any of you guys work with buildings, our perfect reference customer is someone who has multiple buildings. Maybe they deal with multiple utility companies. They don't have much energy tracking, and they're not sure how to deal with these mandates. So yeah, that's it. So thanks a lot. I'm not sure where we are as far as time, Daniela, but I'm happy to answer any other questions people have.
Perfect on timing. We have a little bit extra time for Q&A. I saw that a question did come in, so maybe we can address that first. And anyone else, again, feel free to raise your hand and I can allow you to talk, or just go ahead and throw some questions into the Q&A. First off, thank you, Donna. That was amazing. I'm super excited to go on to Virimodo and see what I can be doing better personally. And I feel like I learned so much, so thank you. So we have one question that came in. Why do developing countries choose to use carbon-intense fuel sources more often than renewable sources when their new and developing infrastructure is most open to cleaner energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Generally, they tend to do it because they perceive it as being cheaper initially. So they look at the initial costs and not all these ramifications of using coal as opposed to going and doing a solar farm. So generally it's about economics most all the time. Most all these questions, unfortunately, economics has been the answer to that question. And you are completely right. Who asked that question? Sorry, name?
Do you want to speak? Hold on.
Yeah, please.
All right, you're good to go.
Yeah, my name's Kwabena.
Kwabena, okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for your presentation.
Current CSL member.
Yeah, hey. Yeah, no, it's because of cost. Because think about it, probably they have to do upfront costs of purchasing the wind equipment, the batteries, and if it's the same thing for the solar, whereas with coal, they can just start digging, right? And they have like an unlimited supply. So, and usually they can get men and women to dig pretty cheaply. It's really just bizarre to me. I completely agree with you. Definitely solar would be better option because why? You don't have to have a grid. You can have these microgrids or smaller areas that just work with small communities, a small village, and that could pump the electricity for that small area. And the other benefit of it, in addition to the air, is that they could then be more secure. Think about if the New York grid went down, like it would be insane, right? Where if you have these small micro grids that only deal with small areas, it's so much more secure. And probably that brings me to another thought. And in the real world right now, so I did some military service, and a lot of the military bases right now in the US are developing these small micro grids. Because why? If the base is in the state of Virginia and some city, let's just say in the District of Columbia, close by, the grid gets struck out, there's some cyber hacks, that military base can still function if it has this micro grid, a small grid that only controls electricity for the base. So there are some strategic reasons to use microgrids, what you're recommending, and places like hospitals would also be a great place to have your own source of energy come what may. If New York went down for 3 days, the hospital cannot survive without energy for 3 days. So, I mean, I don't get it either. And I think also one more point is it could be political. These groups that have been around forever, they have these huge lobby arms, even in the US here. it's just been unbelievable with the gas companies and the oil companies and their lobbyists. But what's really interesting that's changed in this country is that these companies now, they don't call themselves like oil company anymore. They call themselves energy companies. And a lot of them are trying to work with companies like us because they're saying, you know, we need to change what we're doing because that was the past and people just aren't putting up with it anymore. And so like they see the future, and the future is not fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm. That's all awesome. And in regards to the developing countries, do you know of organizations that put in work trying to spread knowledge about the hidden costs that end up coming up later if you use the carbon concentrated fuel source?
You know what? I do not, but I have a friend who is actually doing microgrids now on the continent of Africa. He's doing it in Nigeria and also South Africa. I will ask him. And if Daniela has your contact, I will email you. I will ask him, and I'll probably even connect you with him because he's on the ground and not, at least on the continent of Africa. And he certainly probably has a better feel for which multinational NGOs or which groups are providing information for developing countries. So yeah, I'll star that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
And actually I was in Ghana recently and I heard that different people were using solar panels, which I thought was really great because when you take those solar panels, and it's really simple, you just put them in a place that's near the equator and there's always sun, you end up getting a ton of energy.
It's a no-brainer. It's like free energy. Like it's free.
So simple.
Yeah, and it's free. Like you never have to like feed the furnace anything, right? Because it's free. One thing you said something, it brought something else to mind, and it slipped me what it was now. But yeah, no. So yeah, in a lot of these business, and a lot of these developing nations where there is no electricity right now, I know you guys have probably seen this, but this is like a business opportunity. It's a very big business opportunity. Why? If you can go and set up these small micro grids for the village, what ends up happening is they don't make the villagers pay for the cost of equipment. They only make the villager pay on a monthly basis for the electricity. So what they end up doing from a business perspective is they put that in the cost of the energy, and they actually end up getting two benefits, right? So think about it. If you own the solar farm, you have those assets. You can take those assets and get a loan against those assets and then open up another solar farm in another village. And then at the same time, you're getting consistent cash flows because once someone's paying for electricity, they don't stop paying for electricity. So it's a wonderful business model. And who I'm going to connect you to, my friend, that's exactly what he's doing. So he does not make the villagers pay for any part of the equipment. They're only paying for their monthly consumption. He wraps up his cost of equipment as part of that cost. And I'm not sure his payback period, but it's something inside of 5 years. And it's just a tremendous business opportunity for anybody on the call that's from a different part of the world. It's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Any more? Do we have any more questions, anyone? Feel free to raise your hand. All right, we got one coming in.
Okay.
All right, go for it. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. So I was wondering, fortunately I came a little bit late, and I wanted to ask if, so one of my projects that I was working on is about green walls and green roofs, living green walls and green walls.
Did you say green wood, ROOFs, right? And what was the other
yeah, roofs, yeah.
Okay. And what was the other one?
And living green walls, which actually can reduce urban heat island in big cities, for example, like New York, Chicago.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I learned that they can reduce for each building up to 75 energy consumption, up to 75%. So
fantastic.
Right. So I started to develop more and learn more about that. And this is an excellent kind of like opportunity for large cities to reduce their energy consumption, to provide people with some kind of like more nature in this concrete world, right? It cleans the air. It provides people with a lot of good
green space.
It supports biodiversity and ecosystems in the big, large cities.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with in the communities where like low-income communities with high population density, there are not a lot of parks. There are not a lot of like green spaces. So my question would be more like, why, if we have this knowledge and it's available, a lot of countries, especially I think in Tokyo, green rooftops, they are very popular. There's like such a big benefit, and why cities in America, for example, I'm not sure about Europe or developing countries, but why don't we still kind of like have this going? Like we don't have enough.
You know what? I think really and truly the answer to this, based upon my experience so far, is that this country has been owned by the oil lobbyists, and the oil lobbyists are the people that are affecting the people that are in Congress, that are making the laws. And generally it has been those people that have blocked any good work going on. And I think we're just now getting to the point where, look, it was like, I don't know, we're all too young to remember this, but when tobacco was first grown and people started smoking these cigarettes, and those people that were growing the tobacco, the cigarette companies were telling people, oh, it doesn't cause cancer. Oh, you can't get hurt. Oh, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Well, they knew that was not true, but they had paid the people in Congress. And so this is how it got over for so long. And like, these oil companies know that they're wrecking the environment. And they've known it for a long time. It's just now that we're finally getting woke, right? And saying, okay, look, we're tired of your discussion of, things that are not reality. And so we're going to move forward. That's in the best interest of the people. So this type of thing has happened in our country in different parallels. And you can think about cigarettes being one of them. It's not like that the science wasn't there. It's just that it was not being used because of the people that were in power were affecting the people in the Washington, D.C. And these laws are what affects the rest of us. Good talking to everybody. I owe you one contact with the guy who's doing microgrids on the continent of Africa.
Yeah, I'll send you his email.
All right, cool. Other than that, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.
Perfect.